Alphacool Waterblock install, and a 5090. What a perfect pairing. Let's do this. Welcome back to another episode of Chadrick's Tech. So let's get right into this performance data of this water block. It's probably a waste of money, right? 5090s, they don't consume a lot of energy. They're not catching flames, and they're catching on fire. They don't generate a lot of heat. The air coolers are perfectly fine, which I guess of all the things, the air coolers really aren't that bad, but I think we could probably do better if we follow suit with the other water blocks that I've installed on cards. So it goes without saying, use this at your own risk. The installation video has already been published. That's out there. I walk through sort of the intro of the card, the build, getting the pads and everything set in place, getting it cinched up, installed in the system. Then I ended up running some tests. So this is a diagram of the system that we're working in here. This is the office rig. I've featured it on the channel. It was featured especially in the last video of its components. This is, you can see the sort of the summary there. Everything that I can water cool on this board has been water cooled. There were some other products that had water cooled VRM possibilities, but they were fraught with issues and seriously expensive. So aside from the VRM on the motherboard, everything else is water cooled, including a custom SSD water cooling option, memory, CPU, GPU, over 3 liters of fluid. What was it, 15 140 millimeter fans. You can see the 200 millimeters peeking out the back here from the back side. So you would think that this would be an obnoxiously loud system. It's not. It's not, because every radiator is in push-pull, and and you don't have to run the fans hardly at all, and you get excellent airflow in this thing, and it's almost inaudible, believe it or not. I mean, it's running right now. We're recording on it right now. It's not loud. So nonetheless, this video isn't about the system. This is about the card integrated into this system. So let's just jump right into the performance data. So looking at 3D Mark, you had a roughly 1 to 4% change in performance. And again, the way I set this up is I plugged the card in, no overclocking, no undervolting, straight out of the box, plug it into the slot, run it with the air cooler. Here's the numbers that you get. Then I ended up putting the water block on, making no other changes other than putting the water block on. Plug it into the system. What performance numbers do you get? Didn't overclock it, so it's not going to be any different in speed, right? No, you're going to see that there's a performance difference. It can stay cool, and therefore it will actually perform better. And you didn't do anything other than spend the money on a water block. So you have to justify that to yourself to get these numbers, but you got a 4%, up to a 4% uplift in performance in 3D Mark. Is that worth it to you? That's pretty good for doing nothing. Again, we haven't even started tweaking with this card, right? So performance test, really no big difference. Unique Heaven, Valley, Superposition. These aren't great tests to push your GPU, so you don't expect much of a change. How about your productivity numbers? V-Ray, for some reason, it went down 1.6. The CPU got slower. Anyway, but you can see there's really no difference in the CPU. Even down here in the Geekbench scores, 0.4 minus 0.6, that's probably margin of error. So what you're seeing when you're looking at the GPU data versus the CPU data, and you're seeing a consistent uplift across the board for your GPU scores, then I would tend to believe that there is a performance increase, albeit maybe minimal in many of them, but in most there is an uplift. So I left the CPU ones in there just to show that we aren't boosting the CPU either. There were no changes to that setup. That's been water cooled, delidded the whole time. In Game Tech Bench, you see a consistent uplift across the board. So you're looking at about a 4% uplift just putting the water block on your GPU, at least in this situation. What about temperature comparison? Of the CPU, there is a little bit of a bump in CPU temp. Now, that's interesting to me. I didn't expect this at all. One, because I've tested other GPUs, and there was 0% change across the board, but there is now a bump in CPU temp. Now, I don't know if, I don't think when you're looking at Blender, you see almost 30% increase from 57 to 74. That's a huge difference. So what I'm going to say is that I don't think it's time for me to reapply liquid metal to my direct die cooler. I don't think it's been long enough to really need a reapplication. So what I'm going to chalk it up to is that the water blocks are doing their job, that they're extracting the heat in the water, and some of that increased temperature is making its way to the CPU side of things and causing some transient increases in temp. Where there was really cold water, there is probably increased water temp, so that you're actually seeing a bump in your temperatures. That's what I'm going to attribute this to, because my CPU never really went over 70 degrees before. And this is the i9-14900KS. So what I'm saying is it's roughly, you went from 63 to 68. So you had a, 5-degree bump in your temps. I'm going to say it's because of the heat that got transferred into the system from the GPU, because we do know it can throw heat. Now let's look directly to GPU temperature. And this is where you really see the benefit. You had a 38% drop in temps. Average of 57 degrees down to 36 degrees. Wow. And this is a 5090 that just really can crank some heat into the water, right? So we've seen, if you've been following along this channel, you've seen these kind of adjustments and these kind of temperature drops. When I put water blocks on after testing in this situation, we're seeing the same degree of percentage reduction in your temperatures. I just think that you've just got a higher TDP card that's really throwing heat into the water. So, but it's obviously working well, right? How about your memory junction temperatures? Same. 40% drop in temperature, 66.7 down to 40.4. And these aren't slouch tests either. This is a combination of your 3D marks, your V-rays, your synthetic benchmarks, and your productivity. So, just as you glance down through these numbers, there's really no huge outliers. It just works that well. So what about power consumption? You saw about a 3.5% drop in the power required to get a 4% increase in performance. So isn't that interesting? I think it leaves you a lot of headroom if you really want to try to push this card. Now, we aren't talking to the levels of, using liquid nitrogen or anything, but it's obvious that the card stays cool and the card performs better. But what about when you're actually using it for productivity? So let's look at DaVinci Resolve Studio 20, and let's do a quick export of that 22 to 25 minute, whatever, that small 4K file that I've been using to test over and over again on this channel. Same file. And the render time, no difference. No difference. But, obviously it's running cooler, but there's no appreciable difference in your productivity to render the file. What about Puget Bench? The benchmark of 1.2.0. That's an excellent benchmarking tool for productivity, putting the system through all these stresses of color corrections and fusions and 3D rendering and basically how are you going to manipulate the video. It puts it in all these situations. And looking at the standard score, you have a small bump in the performance of being able to use the card for productivity. Now, it didn't factor into rendering, and maybe there was really not much really difference in terms of what to render, because the quick render was an H.264 with the MOV container. So the 264 codec with the MOV container, very common to do. And those supported on the GPU as well. So I don't think you were going to see much of an uplift, because it's the same card, same situations, and it wasn't running that hot to begin with the air cooler. It wasn't throttling. So that's why you don't really see much of a difference. Here, I think it's also the same thing. You don't see a huge difference. We're running at max capacity almost with the OEM cooler versus the Waterblock, but you do get a small bump in performance if you want to consider that. And I think this goes back to when you're looking at productivity. Do you want to buy an OC card or the standard card? This is where I would agree that you don't see a big uplift in performance because you spent extra money for the OC version. I think the same thing holds true here for your productivity. Having the air cooler versus the Waterblock, it's not showing a huge difference. You know, you saw a 4% difference in your synthetic and your benchmarkings, but not when it comes down to your true productivity benchmark of Puget Bench. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth having. Remember, everything's running cooler. The system is going to be more stable, run cooler. Your electronics are going to last longer. There's a benefit to, you know, not having everything run on the ragged edge of heat, right? So what is the summary here? You saw a 4% performance uplift, roughly minimal uplift in the Puget Bench score. There was a slight bump in your CPU temps of like 7%. Again, thinking that might be the heat from the card going in the water, because your GPU temp, your GPU memory temp, all dropped. And then to get roughly the same percentage or even a slightly increase in performance, you didn't have to use as much power to get that. So it does leave you headroom. So you get a slight performance boost, you get maximum cooling opportunities, and you have room for overclocking. Is it worth getting a Waterblock for the 5090? Absolutely. Water cooling is, I don't know. I love water cooling everything. So when I was picking out components for the system, the first thing I was wondering is, are they planning a Waterblock for it? It's a brand new card. I know there's nothing out. Are they going to get a Waterblock for the car? If the answer was no, I wasn't buying the product. I love to water cool. It's really an enthusiast thing to do. It is more expensive, but everything runs so much better and so much cooler and so much quieter than having fans blazing when you're trying to be productive. So I hope you guys have found this information interesting. It follows suit with some of the other water blocks that I put on the card, but you know, this again is using the OEM pads. I didn't use the putty that I purchased, and that maybe when I get up the gumption, maybe I will throw some putty on here. Maybe I'll play with some overclocking, see what the temps do with the pads, and maybe if I throw some putty on here in the future to see if it actually cools it a little bit better. I bet it does, but it's speculation. You got to test it, right? So hope you've enjoyed this video. There's more to come. Stay safe. God bless.